Alright, before we even get into this list, let me hit you with a question that most fans never think about. What if I told you that your favorite idol, the one you see performing on massive stages, selling out world tours, and living what looks like the ultimate dream life, was once buried under a mountain of debt before they even got the chance to stand in front of a camera? Yeah, you heard that right. Debt. We're talking about trainee debt, the silent, invisible price tag that every single K-pop trainee carries on their shoulders the moment they walk through those agency doors. Vocal lessons? That costs money. Dance training? Money. Housing, food, styling, even the water they drink during practice, all of it gets logged into a tab, and that tab keeps growing every single month, every single year. Now here's the wild part. Stray Kids didn't all train for the same amount of time. Some came in early, some came in late, some transferred from other companies, and some were scouted from literally the other side of the planet. So the question is, who racked up the biggest bill? Who was sitting on the heaviest financial burden before JYP even gave them the green light to debut? Was it the leader who spent nearly a decade grinding in the system? Or was it someone you'd never expect? Buckle up, because we're counting down from number 8 all the way to number 1, and trust me, by the time we get to that top spot, your jaw is going to hit the floor. Let's get into it. Number 8, I.N, the baby who walked in last, but still carried a price tag. Now before you say anything, yes, we're starting at number 8, and yes, that means this member technically had the least amount of trainee debt compared to the rest of the squad. But don't you dare scroll past this one thinking it's not a big deal, because even the smallest debt in the K-pop trainee system is enough to make a regular person sweat bullets. We're talking about young Hyunjin, the magne, the baby of Stray Kids, the kid who walked into JYP Entertainment with braces still on his teeth and a dream so big it barely fit inside his teenage heart. And here's the thing about Hyunjin, he joined the agency in 2017, which means by the time Stray Kids officially debuted in March 2018, this kid had been training for roughly just 1 year. 1 year. Sounds short, right? Sounds like he got lucky, right? Well, hold on, because even in that single year, the debt machine was already running at full speed, and every single day he spent inside that building added another line to his tab. Let's break it down so you really understand what 1 year of trainee debt actually looks like in the JYP system. First, you've got housing. JYP Entertainment, like most major agencies, provides dormitory-style housing for their trainees, especially for someone like Hyunjin who came all the way from Busan. He wasn't a Seoul kid. He left his family, left his hometown, packed a bag, and moved to the capital as a teenager. That dormitory? It's not free. It goes on the tab. Every single month. Then you've got your training sessions, and we're not talking about some casual after-school dance class. We're talking about professional vocal coaching, multiple times a week, with top-tier instructors who have trained some of the biggest names in the industry. Each session? Logged. Each hour? Billed. Then there's dance training, intense, grueling, hours-long sessions that push your body to the absolute limit. Choreography workshops, freestyle practice, body conditioning, all of it tracked, all of it added to the ever-growing number on your account. And let's not forget about the stuff people never think about: food expenses, transportation costs, medical checkups, styling consultations, even the outfits and shoes trainees wear during evaluations. Everything gets logged. Now here's what makes Hyunjin's story particularly interesting. He didn't come from a wealthy family that could just casually absorb those costs. He was a kid from Busan, a regular family, normal background, nothing extravagant. When he auditioned for JYP Entertainment, he wasn't some child star with connections or a trust fund backing him up. He was just a boy who loved to sing, who had this bright, infectious energy that made people stop and pay attention. And JYP saw it. They saw potential in this kid who still had metal on his teeth and a voice that hadn't even fully matured yet. So they took him in. They invested in him, but make no mistake, that investment was a business transaction, and every single one spent on developing young Hyunjin was carefully documented and expected to be paid back from future earnings. Now let's talk about the emotional weight of that debt, because this is where it gets real. Imagine being 16 years old, living away from your parents for the first time, training in a cutthroat environment where you're constantly being evaluated, compared, and ranked against other trainees, and on top of all that psychological pressure. You know that every single day you spend there, you're going deeper into a financial hole. You haven't earned a single dollar yet. You haven't performed on a single stage. You haven't released a single song. But the debt? It's already there. It's already growing. And the scariest part? There's absolutely no guarantee you'll ever debut. You could train for a year, 2 years, 5 years, and still get cut. Still get sent home with nothing but a pile of debt and a crushed dream. That's the reality Hyunjin walked into when he stepped through those doors in 2017. And here's what makes it even more intense. Hyunjin joined right before the Stray Kids survival show was about to begin filming. That means he had the least amount of preparation time compared to everyone else. While members like Bangchan had been refining their skills for the better part of a decade, and others had been training for 2, 3, even 4 years, Hyunjin had months. Months to learn choreography, months to develop his vocal technique, months to build the stage presence needed to survive a nationally televised elimination show. The pressure was astronomical. He wasn't just competing against other trainees, he was competing against members of his own future group, guys who had years of training under their belts, guys who could dance circles around him and hit notes he was still learning to reach. And yet, and this is the part that gets me every time, he made it. This kid with the braces, the least training time, the shortest track record, somehow convinced JYP himself that he deserved to stand on that debut stage. But here's the kicker that ties it all back to our topic. Even though Hyunjin had the shortest training period and therefore the smallest trainee debt, it was still a significant amount. Industry estimates suggest that even 1 year of full-time K-pop training at a major agency can rack up anywhere from 30 million to 50 million Korean won. That's roughly 23,000 to 38,000 US dollars. For a 16-year-old kid from Busan with no income, no savings, and no safety net, that's not a small number. That's a mountain. A smaller mountain than some of his group mates, sure, but a mountain nonetheless. And the weight of that mountain sat on his shoulders through every practice session, every evaluation, every sleepless night in that dormitory when he was too exhausted to move but too anxious to sleep. So yeah, I.N comes in at number 8 on our list, the member with the relatively lightest financial burden heading into debut. But don't mistake lightest for light. In the world of K-pop trainee debt, there's no such thing as light. There's only heavy, heavier, and heaviest. And as we move up this list, trust me, it gets a whole lot heavier. The question is, who's sitting at number 7? Which member trained just a little bit longer, invested just a little bit more, and walked into debut day carrying a debt that would make most adults break into a cold sweat? Stay locked in, because this list is just getting started, and the stories only get more intense from here. Number 7, Seungmin, the fanboy who bet everything on a single audition. Alright, moving up the ladder now, and at number 7 we've got a member whose story is honestly one of the most relatable in the entire group, because this guy wasn't some child prodigy who got scouted on the street, wasn't a former backup dancer for a global superstar, and definitely wasn't someone who grew up inside the walls of an entertainment agency. No, Kim Seungmin was literally just a fan. A K-pop fan. A regular high school student who loved music so much, loved Day 6 so much, idolized young K so much, that one day he woke up and said, you know what, I'm not just gonna watch from the audience anymore. I'm gonna get on that stage myself. And that decision, that one single moment of courage, is what led him straight into the jaws of the trainee debt machine. Seungmin entered JYP Entertainment through their 13th open audition, and we need to talk about what that actually means, because people throw around the phrase open audition like it's some casual talent show at a local mall. It's not. JYP's open auditions attract thousands upon thousands of hopefuls from all across South Korea and sometimes even internationally. We're talking about massive lines wrapping around buildings, kids as young as 12 standing in the cold for hours just to get 60 seconds in front of a panel of judges who've seen it all and are almost impossible to impress. The rejection rate is absolutely brutal. Some estimates put it at over 99%. That means for every 1,000 kids who show up with stars in their eyes and songs in their hearts, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe even fewer actually make it through. And Seungmin? He didn't just make it through. He took first place. First place. Out of thousands of applicants, this fanboy, this kid who probably had day 6 posters on his bedroom wall, walked in, sang his heart out, and walked out as the #1 pick. Now that sounds like a fairy tale, right? Sounds like the universe handed him a golden ticket. But here's what nobody tells you about winning a K-pop audition. The moment you sign that trainee contract, the clock starts ticking and the debt starts piling. Seungmin reportedly joined JYP sometime in 2017, which gives him a training period of roughly 1 to 1.5 years before Stray Kids debuted in March 2018. That's slightly longer than I.N's timeline, and that extra time, even if it's just a few months, translates directly into additional costs on his trainee account. Let's walk through what Seungmin's daily life looked like during that period, because this is where the money burns fastest. First off, unlike I.N, who was known more for his vocal potential and youthful charm, Seungmin came in as someone who could already sing, but can sing and can sing at idol level are two completely different universes. JYP Entertainment is notorious for their rigorous vocal training program. They don't just teach you to hit notes, they rebuild your entire vocal foundation from scratch. Breath control, diaphragm support, head voice, mixed voice, falsetto transitions, emotional delivery, microphone technique. Every single aspect of your voice gets deconstructed and reassembled by professionals who charge premium rates for their expertise. And Seungmin, being primarily a vocalist, would have spent a disproportionate amount of his training hours, and therefore a disproportionate amount of his accumulating debt, in those vocal rooms. Hour after hour, session after session, his voice getting stronger while his debt got deeper. But it's not just vocals. K-pop is a total performance package, and JYP is especially strict about this. Seungmin also had to train in dancing, and let's be honest here, dance was not Seungmin's strongest suit when he first walked in. He was a singer, not a dancer. He didn't have years of dance academy background. He didn't grow up freestyling in his bedroom to hip-hop beats. He had to learn from near zero, and that meant extra dance classes, extra practice hours, extra sessions with choreography coaches who had to bring him up to speed with trainees who had been dancing for years. Every single one of those extra sessions? Added to the bill. Every remedial class, every supplementary workshop, every one-on-one correction session, it all went on the tab. And here's something people rarely consider when they talk about trainee debt, the psychological cost of knowing you're falling behind in certain areas. Seungmin knew he wasn't the best dancer in the room. He knew there were trainees around him who could learn choreography in an afternoon while he needed days. And that knowledge, that constant awareness of your own gaps, creates this suffocating pressure to train harder, stay longer, practice more, which paradoxically means spending more of the company's resources, which means accumulating more debt. It's a vicious cycle that grinds you down mentally while building you up professionally. Now let's talk about the survival show, because this is where Seungmin's debt situation gets an extra layer of complexity. When Stray Kids the reality show started filming, every single trainee involved became part of a televised production, and TV productions cost money. Camera crews, editing teams, set designs, transportation, wardrobe, makeup, hairstyling, all of these production costs get factored into the overall investment the company makes in these trainees. And while the exact financial breakdown varies, depending on the agency and the contract terms, it's widely understood in the industry that survival show participants often see a bump in their accumulated costs because the company is now spending significantly more on their development and exposure. Seungmin was part of that show from start to finish. He survived every round, proved himself week after week, and secured his spot in the final lineup, but every episode he appeared in, every performance he delivered on that show, was another layer of investment that JYP expected to recoup. And here's the emotional gut punch of Seungmin's story. This was a kid who became a trainee because he was a fan. He loved K-pop. He loved the music, the performances, the artistry. He looked up to day 6 with genuine admiration and dreamed of one day standing on the same label as his heroes. But the moment he stepped into that trainee life, the thing he loved became the thing that trapped him. The music that once brought him pure joy became his daily grind, his source of stress, his financial burden. Every song he practiced, every note he perfected, every dance he struggled through, it was all simultaneously chasing his dream and deepening his debt. That duality is something most fans never think about, and it's something that Seungmin carried with him through every single day of his trainee journey. Industry estimates for a trainee with Seungmin's timeline roughly 12 to 18 months of full-time training at a Big Four agency suggest a debt accumulation of somewhere between 40 million to 60 million Korean won, potentially around 30,000 to 46,000 US dollars. That's a conservative estimate, and it doesn't account for the additional costs associated with the survival show production. For a high school kid whose biggest financial decision before this was probably choosing between 2 flavors of ramen at a convenience store, that number is absolutely staggering. And yet, he carried it. He carried that weight through every vocal lesson, every dance practice, every evaluation where his future hung in the balance. He carried it because he believed, truly, deeply believed, that the dream was worth the price. So Seungmin sits at number 7, just one step above I.N, with a slightly heavier financial load and a story that proves sometimes the biggest risk isn't talent or luck. It's having the courage to walk through a door when you have absolutely no idea what's waiting on the other side. But now we move to number 6, and this is where things start to shift, because the next member on our list didn't just walk through a door, they crossed an entire ocean, left behind a career they'd already built, and bet everything on a second chance in a system that doesn't give second chances easily. Who is it? You might think you know, but trust me, this story has layers you've never heard before. Number 6, Lino, the backup dancer who gambled a career for a trainee debt. Okay, now we're getting into territory where the stories start hitting different, because number 6 on this list isn't just about how long someone trained or how much money piled up on a spreadsheet. It's about a guy who already had something most aspiring idols would kill for, and he threw it all away to start from zero with nothing but a dream and a growing mountain of debt. We're talking about Lee Mi-ho, Lino, the member of Stray Kids who, before he ever set foot inside JYP Entertainment as a trainee, was already standing on some of the biggest stages in the world. Not as a trainee. Not as a hopeful. As a professional backup dancer for BTS. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Before he was Lino of Stray Kids, this guy was literally dancing behind the biggest boy band on the planet. He was part of BTS's performance crew during promotions like Not Today, sharing the same stage, breathing the same air, moving to the same beats as the group that was in the middle of taking over the entire global music industry. He had a job. He had income. He had a foot in the door of the entertainment world that most people spend their entire lives trying to pry open. And what did he do? He walked away from all of it. He walked away from the paychecks, the stability, the connections, the prestige of being associated with the biggest name in K-pop, and he walked straight into JYP Entertainment's audition room as nobody. Just another face in a sea of hopefuls. Just another kid with a number pinned to his shirt, waiting for a panel of judges to decide whether he was worth investing in. And when they said yes, when JYP accepted him as a trainee in 2017, the clock started, and so did the debt. Now here's what makes Lino's financial situation particularly fascinating and, honestly, kind of heartbreaking. When you're a backup dancer, you earn money. It's not idle money, it's not life-changing wealth, but it's a paycheck. You're a working professional in the entertainment industry. You have value, you have a skill set, and people pay you for it. The moment Mi-ho transitioned from backup dancer to JYP trainee, that income stream didn't just slow down, it completely evaporated. Overnight, he went from someone who was earning to someone who was owing. Every skill he already possessed, every dance move he'd already mastered, every stage he'd already conquered, meant absolutely nothing on the balance sheet. JYP's trainee system doesn't give you credits for prior experience. You don't get a discount because you already know how to dance. You don't get a shorter training period because you've already performed in front of thousands. You start at zero, just like everyone else, and the meter starts running from day one. Vocal training? Miho needed it badly. He was a dancer, not a singer. His voice was raw, undeveloped, untrained, and in a system like JYP where vocals are treated with almost religious seriousness, that meant intensive, prolonged vocal coaching sessions that burned through resources faster than most other training categories. While someone like Seungmin came in with strong vocal foundations and needed more work on dancing, Miho was the exact opposite, a phenomenal dancer who needed to build his voice from the ground up. And building a voice from scratch at idol level? That's not a weekend project. That's months and months of daily sessions with some of the most expensive vocal coaches in the Korean music industry. Every single one of those sessions went straight onto his trainee account, stacking higher and higher with each passing week. And then came the part of Lino's story that most fans know but few truly understand the financial implications of his elimination from the Stray Kids survival show. During the show's run, Miho was eliminated, cut, sent home, told that he wasn't going to be part of the final lineup. Now imagine the psychological devastation of that moment. You gave up a stable career as a professional dancer. You've been accumulating debt for months. You've poured every ounce of your being into this one shot at debuting as an idol. And then they tell you it's over. You're done. Go home. And here's the financial nightmare scenario that was staring Miho in the face at that moment. If he didn't debut, all that debt didn't just magically disappear. It doesn't work that way. The training costs, the housing, the lessons, the food, the styling, all of that was still on the books. Different agencies handle failed trainee debt differently. Some write it off, some negotiate reduced payments, some expect full repayment. But the uncertainty alone is terrifying. Miho was staring down the barrel of a future where he'd not only lost his shot at being an idol, not only given up his career as a backup dancer, but potentially walked away with a pile of debt and nothing to show for it. No career, no debut, no income, just debt and a broken dream. That's the reality that was sitting on Lino's chest during those agonizing days and weeks after his elimination. But then, and this is where the story takes a turn that feels almost too dramatic to be real, the other members of Stray Kids fought for him. They went to JYP, they made their case, they told the company that Stray Kids wasn't complete without Lee Miho. And JYP listened. Miho was brought back into the group, his elimination was reversed, and he was given a second chance at debut. Sounds like a happy ending, right? And it is emotionally, spiritually, creatively, it's beautiful. But financially, that return came with a cost. Those additional weeks of being in limbo, the reevaluations, the extra training sessions to catch up on what he missed during his absence, the continued housing and living expenses, all of it added back onto a tab that had momentarily seemed like it might become a tragic final bill. And here's the layer that most people don't think about. The survival show itself was a massive production investment. Cameras, crews, sets, editing, post-production, marketing, these shows cost a fortune to produce, and the trainees who participate are often partially accountable for those costs through their contracts. Miho appeared on the show, got eliminated, got brought back, meaning his involvement in the production was more complicated, more extended, and potentially more costly than a trainee who simply made it through cleanly from start to finish. The stop and start nature of his journey likely created additional administrative and logistical costs that found their way onto his account in one form or another. Conservative estimates for Lino's total trainee debt, factoring in his roughly 12 to 18 months of training, the intensive vocal development he required, the survival show participation, and the complications of his elimination and return, put his accumulated costs somewhere in the range of 50 million to 70 million Korean won, approximately 38,000 to 54,000 US dollars. That's a significant jump from I.N and Seungmin, and it reflects not just the duration of his training, but the complexity and intensity of his specific journey through the system. What makes Lino's debt story particularly poignant is the element of choice. I.N was a kid chasing a dream. Seungmin was a fan following his heart. But Miho? Miho made a calculated, deliberate, high-stakes gamble. He looked at a stable career, a reliable income, a path that was already working, and he said no. He said it wasn't enough. He wanted more. He wanted to be the one in the spotlight, not the shadow behind it. And that decision, as courageous and ultimately rewarding as it turned out to be, came with a price tag that was heavier than most people will ever know. Every one of that trainee debt represented a choice, the choice to risk everything for a dream that had no guarantee of coming true. So Lee No lands at number 6, carrying a debt that was built not just on time and training, but on one of the boldest career gambles in recent K-pop history. He bet his present for a chance at a future, and while we all know now that the bet paid off spectacularly, there was a very real version of this story where it didn't. A version where Lee Mi-ho walked away from JYP with nothing but debt and regret. But that's not what happened. And that's what makes this story not just a financial breakdown, but a testament to what it means to truly go all in. Now, number 5 is where things get really interesting, because the next member didn't just leave behind a career or a hometown. They left behind an entire continent, a completely different culture, and a language they could barely speak. And the debt they accumulated? It carries a weight that goes far beyond money. Stay right here. Number 5, Felix, the Australian who crossed an ocean and couldn't even say hello. Now this right here is the story that breaks my heart every single time I think about it, because number 5 on our list isn't just about trainee debt in the traditional sense. It's about a kid who didn't just leave behind a house or a school or a neighborhood. He left behind an entire world, an entire identity, everything he knew, everything he was comfortable with, every person who ever made him feel safe. He packed it all into a suitcase and flew across the Pacific Ocean to chase a dream in a country where he couldn't even order food by himself. We're talking about Felix, Lee Yo-bok, the Korean-Australian member of Stray Kids who grew up in Sydney, who spoke English as his first language, who lived a completely normal Australian teenage life with his family and friends, and then one day, JYP Entertainment held an open audition in Australia, and this kid showed up. And everything changed. Felix was scouted around 2016, which puts his training period at roughly 1.5 to 2 years before Stray Kids' debut in March 2018. Now on paper, that doesn't sound dramatically longer than Lee No or Seungmin. But here's what the numbers don't tell you: Felix's training wasn't just about dancing and singing. Felix had an entire additional category of expenses that none of the Korean-born members had to deal with, and that category alone potentially added millions of won to his trainee debt. Language. Korean language. When Felix arrived in South Korea, his Korean was practically non-existent. He could barely string together a basic sentence. He couldn't read signs, couldn't follow conversations, couldn't understand his instructors when they gave him feedback during training sessions. And in an industry where communication is everything, where you need to understand lyrics you're singing, dialogue you're delivering, instructions you're receiving, interviews you're giving, not speaking the language isn't just an inconvenience. It's a crisis. And crises in the trainee system cost money. JYP had to invest in Korean language tutoring for Felix, intensive, one-on-one sessions with professional language instructors who specialize in getting foreign trainees up to speed as quickly as possible. These aren't your standard community college language classes. These are high-intensity, immersive programs designed to cram years of language acquisition into months. And every single session, every single hour spent with a tutor, every single textbook and study material, it all went on Felix's tab. On top of the regular training costs that every other trainee was accumulating, the vocal coaching, the dance training, the performance workshops, Felix had this entire additional layer of expenses that was uniquely his. No other member had to pay for language lessons. No other member had that extra line item on their trainee account. It was a cost that was born entirely from Felix's circumstances, and it added a weight to his debt that the other members simply didn't carry. But the language barrier wasn't just a financial issue, it was an emotional and professional catastrophe that bled into every other aspect of his training and, by extension, every other category of his debt. Think about it, when Felix couldn't understand his vocal coach's instructions, his progress slowed down. When his progress slowed down, he needed more sessions. More sessions meant more money. When he couldn't follow the choreographer's verbal cues during dance practice, he fell behind. When he fell behind, he needed extra practice time, extra correction sessions, extra one-on-one attention, all of which cost money. The language barrier wasn't just one line item on his account, it was a multiplier that inflated every other category of his training expenses. He wasn't just learning slower because he was less talented. He was learning slower because he literally couldn't understand what was being taught, and that communication gap turned a one-year learning curve into something much steeper and much more expensive. And then we get to the part of Felix's story that runs parallel to Lino's, his elimination from the Stray Kids survival show. That's right, Felix was also eliminated. Just like Miho, Felix was cut from the lineup during the show, told he wasn't going to make it, told that his dream was over. And the reason? His Korean. Despite months of intensive language training, despite all that investment, all that tutoring, all those hours of study, Felix's Korean still wasn't at the level the company felt was necessary for debut. They looked at this incredibly talented dancer with one of the most unique and recognizable deep voices in all of K-pop, and they said, "Not yet. Your Korean isn't good enough. Go home." Now let's pause and really feel the weight of that moment for Felix specifically, because it hits differently than it did for Lino. When Miho was eliminated, he at least had the option of potentially going back to backup dancing. He had a skill set that was directly employable in the industry. But Felix? Felix was an Australian kid sitting in Seoul, South Korea, thousands of miles from home, thousands of miles from his family, with limited Korean skills, no local support network, no fallback career, and a growing pile of trainee debt. If he didn't get back into the group, what was his plan? Go back to Sydney and pretend none of this ever happened? Go back to his normal Australian life with a mountain of debt from a Korean entertainment company hanging over his head? The terror of that situation is almost unimaginable. He was 17 years old, alone in a foreign country, rejected by the only system that had given his sacrifice any meaning, and the debt was still there. Still growing. Still waiting. And just like with Lino, the other members refused to let Felix go. They fought for him, insisted that the group needed him, that Stray Kids wasn't Stray Kids without Lee Felix. And JYP, once again, listened. Felix was brought back, his elimination reversed, his journey continued, but so did his debt. The additional training after his return, the catch-up sessions, the continued language tutoring that was now more urgent than ever, the extended stay in company housing, all of it stacked on top of what was already a heavier than average trainee account. Now let's talk about another cost that's unique to international trainees like Felix: relocation and travel. When Felix was scouted in Australia, someone had to pay for his flight to Seoul. Someone had to pay for his initial housing setup. Someone had to cover the logistics of getting a foreign teenager into the Korean trainee system, visa paperwork, documentation, administrative processing. And, depending on the contract, some or all of those costs might have been fronted by JYP and added to Felix's trainee account. During holidays or breaks, if Felix flew back to Sydney to see his family, those flights? Potentially on the tab. If his family flew to Seoul to visit him, the company might not cover that, but the time Felix took off from training meant delayed progress, which meant a longer training period, which meant more accumulated costs. Everything connects. Everything compounds. The international element of Felix's story turned what would have been a standard trainee debt into something significantly larger and more complicated. Conservative estimates for Felix's total trainee debt, factoring in his approximately 2 years of training, the extensive Korean language tutoring, the international relocation costs, the survival show production expenses, the elimination and return complications, and the additional training across multiple skill areas put his accumulated costs somewhere in the range of 60 million to 85 million Korean won, approximately 46,000 to 65,000 US dollars. And that number carries a weight that goes beyond currency, because every single one of that debt represented not just a financial obligation, but an emotional sacrifice. Everyone was a reminder that he was far from home. Everyone was a reminder that his parents were on the other side of the planet, worrying about their son, unable to help, unable to protect him, unable to do anything but wait and hope and pray that their boy's sacrifice would be worth it. Felix's debt wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It was the price of distance. The price of language. The price of being a stranger in a country that doesn't slow down for you, doesn't translate for you, doesn't make exceptions for you just because you're young and scared and homesick. He paid all of that in money, in tears, in sleepless nights staring at his phone wanting to call home, but knowing that hearing his mom's voice would make it harder to stay. So Felix sits at number 5, carrying a debt that was inflated by geography, language, and the brutal reality of being an international trainee in a system designed for locals. But as heavy as his burden was, we're only halfway through this list, and the members above him? Their stories are longer, their training periods deeper, and their deaths? Significantly heavier. Number 4 is someone who walked into JYP with a fire in his chest and lyrics already pouring out of his pen, but the years he spent being shaped into the artist he'd become didn't come cheap. Not even close. Number 4, Changbin, the rapper who was burning money in the studio before anyone knew his name. Alright, we've officially crossed the halfway point of this list, and if you thought the numbers were already getting uncomfortable, buckle up, because from here on out, every single member we're about to talk about spent years inside the JYP system. Not months. Years. And when you're talking about years of full-time training at one of the big 4 entertainment companies in South Korea, you're not talking about pocket change anymore. You're talking about life-altering amounts of money being stacked onto the shoulders of teenagers who haven't earned a single paycheck in their lives. And at number 4, we've got a member who didn't just train as a performer, he trained as a creator, a writer, a producer, a rapper who was pouring his soul into notebooks and hard drives long before the world ever heard the name Stray Kids. We're talking about Changbin, the dark horse, the powerhouse, the compact wrecking ball of raw energy who walked into JYP Entertainment around 2015 to 2016 and immediately started doing something that most trainees never do. He started making music. Not just learning it. Making it. And that distinction is crucial to understanding why Changbin's trainee debt sits a full tier above the members we've already discussed, because creating music inside an entertainment agency doesn't just cost time and effort. It costs money. Serious money. Let's start with the basics. Changbin's training period at JYP was approximately 2 to 3 years before Stray Kids debuted in March 2018. That's a significant chunk of time, nearly double or triple what members like I.N, Seungmin, and Lino spent in the system. And every single month of that extended training period came with the standard costs we've already broken down: housing in company dormitories, daily meals, vocal training sessions, dance workshops, performance evaluations, styling consultations, medical checkups, and all the countless miscellaneous expenses that silently pile up in the background of a trainee's daily life. 2 to 3 years of that baseline cost alone would put Changbin's debt substantially higher than anyone we've covered so far. But here's where Changbin's story takes a turn that separates him from the pack: studio time. Changbin wasn't just a trainee who showed up to classes, learned the choreography, practiced his vocals, and went back to the dorm. He was a trainee who was actively writing raps, composing beats, experimenting with production software, and spending countless hours in JYP's recording studios crafting the sound that would eventually define Stray Kids' musical identity. And recording studios at major entertainment companies aren't free resources that trainees can just casually wander into whenever they feel creative. Studio time is one of the most expensive commodities in the music industry: professional-grade equipment, soundproofed rooms, mixing consoles, high-end microphones, digital audio workstations loaded with premium software and plugins. Every hour Changbin spent in those studios, experimenting with his sound, recording demo tracks, learning the intricacies of music production, that was an hour of resource usage that got logged, tracked, and added to his account. And Changbin wasn't just dabbling. He was obsessed. Anyone who has followed Stray Kids from the beginning knows that Changbin's work ethic is almost frightening in its intensity. This is a guy who would finish a full day of regular training, hours of dancing, singing, performing, and then go straight to the studio to write and record until the early hours of the morning. night after night, week after week, month after month. While other trainees were resting, recovering, sleeping, Changbin was in the booth, laying down verses, experimenting with flows, building a catalog of songs that most people would never hear, but that represented thousands of hours of work and, by extension, thousands of dollars in accumulated studio costs. And let's talk about the production training itself, because this is a cost category that most fans have zero awareness of. JYP Entertainment, to its credit, is one of the few major agencies that actively encourages and supports trainee producers, but that support comes with a price tag. Learning to produce music at a professional level requires mentorship from experienced producers, access to industry-standard software like Logic Pro, Ableton, and FL Studio, training on mixing and mastering techniques, and hands-on experience with production workflows that are far more complex than anything a teenager could learn from YouTube tutorials alone. Changbin received this kind of specialized training, and it wasn't cheap. Production mentorship from JYP's in-house team, access to premium software licenses, supplementary courses in music theory and composition. Every single element of his development as a producer added layers to his trainee debt that the pure performance-focused trainees simply didn't have. Now here's something that makes Changbin's financial situation even more interesting, the 3 Racha factor. During their trainee days, Changbin formed 3 Racha with Bang Chan and Han, a production and rap unit that was creating, recording, and even releasing music on SoundCloud before Stray Kids officially existed. They were making songs in JYP studios, using JYP's equipment, during hours that JYP was technically responsible for funding. And while 3 Racha's early output was incredible for trainees, showing a level of artistry and independence that most idol groups don't achieve until years into their careers, every single one of those tracks was produced using company resources. The studio time, the equipment, the production tools, all of it was part of the investment JYP was making in these trainees, and all of it was being tracked on their individual accounts. Changbin wasn't just accumulating debt through standard training, he was accumulating debt through creative output that, ironically, would become one of the strongest arguments for why Stray Kids deserved to debut in the first place. His talent was simultaneously his greatest asset and his most expensive liability. And then there's the rap training specifically, which operates on a different axis than vocal or dance training. While K-pop agencies have well-established pipelines for developing singers and dancers, rapper development is often more individualized, more experimental, and more resource-intensive. Changbin needed to develop not just technical rap skills, flow, delivery, breath control, diction, but also his writing voice, his lyrical perspective, his ability to tell stories and convey emotions through words. That required a different kind of mentorship, a different kind of coaching, and often a different kind of investment. Rap coaches, lyric writing workshops, freestyle training sessions, exposure to different musical genres and styles to broaden his artistic palette, all of these were part of Changbin's development. And all of them came with costs that went beyond the standard trainee training program. Let's also not forget the survival show. Changbin was a central figure on the Stray Kids survival program. His performances were consistently some of the most talked about and praised moments of the entire series. His rap stages were electrifying, his intensity was magnetic, and his talent was undeniable. But every one of those performances required preparation, special choreography sessions, custom arrangements, wardrobe fittings, rehearsals, recording sessions for pre-produced tracks. And every one of those preparation costs added to his already substantial trainee account. Being a standout performer on the show was great for his future career, but it was also expensive in the present moment. When we add it all up, 2 to 3 years of standard training costs, the additional expenses of studio time and music production resources, specialized rap training and mentorship, production software, and equipment usage. The 3 Racha creative sessions and the survival show production costs, Changbin's estimated trainee debt lands somewhere in the range of 80 million to 110 million Korean won, approximately 61,000 to 85,000 US dollars. That's a number that most adults with full-time jobs would struggle to comprehend as a personal debt, and Changbin was carrying it as a teenager who had never received a single paycheck from the industry he was pouring his life into. What makes Changbin's debt story uniquely compelling is the irony at its core. The very thing that made him invaluable to Stray Kids, the very talent that made the group's music possible, was also the thing that cost him the most. His creativity wasn't free. His artistry wasn't free. Every beat he produced, every lyric he wrote, every demo he recorded in those late-night studio sessions, it all had a price. And he paid that price willingly, passionately, relentlessly, because he understood something that most people don't, that the cost of creating something meaningful is always high, but the cost of never trying is infinitely higher. So Changbin takes number 4, sitting on a debt built not just from training but from creation, from artistry, from the sheer stubborn refusal to be just another trainee who shows up, learns the dance, sings the song, and goes home. He wanted more. He wanted to build something. And building things, especially in the unforgiving economics of the K-pop trainee system, costs more than most people will ever know. Number 3, Hyunjin, the face that was scouted on the street but cost a fortune to build. Now we're in the top 3, and if you've been paying attention to how this list has been escalating, the training periods getting longer, the costs getting heavier, the stories getting more intense, then you already know that the members sitting in these final spots aren't just carrying debt. They're carrying entire chapters of their youth that were signed over to a system that takes everything and promises nothing. And at number 3, we have the member who might be the most visually stunning human being in all of 4th-generation K-pop, a guy who didn't audition, didn't submit a tape, didn't wait in line with 1,000 other hopefuls. Because JYP Entertainment literally found him just walking down the street and said, "We need that face." We're talking about Hyunjin, the visual, the performance king, the human work of art who was street cast by JYP scouts around 2015, recruited into the trainee system at approximately 15 years old, and then spent roughly 3 full years being molded, shaped, refined, and transformed into the idol the world knows today. 3 years. Let that number breathe for a second, because 3 years of full-time training at JYP Entertainment isn't just a long time, it's a lifetime when you're a teenager. Hyunjin entered the system around the same age that most kids are worrying about high school exams and weekend plans, and he didn't come out the other side until he was 18, standing on a debut stage with 7 other members, cameras flashing, fans screaming. And a trainee debt so massive it could have bought a decent apartment in a Seoul suburb. Let's start with the street casting itself, because there's a fascinating and often misunderstood financial dynamic at play when an agency scouts someone rather than the other way around. When a trainee auditions and gets accepted, there's an implicit understanding that the trainee came seeking opportunity. They initiated the relationship, and the company is doing them a favor by investing in their development. But when a company scouts you, when they approach you on the street, hand you a business card, and tell you that you have the look, the presence, the raw material to become a star, the power dynamic shifts. The company is now the pursuer, and the trainee is the prize. But here's the cruel twist: that shift in dynamic doesn't translate to a shift in financial responsibility. Hyunjin was scouted by JYP, but the moment he signed that trainee contract, the economics were exactly the same as if he'd begged his way through the front door. Everyone spent on his development went straight onto his account, just like every other trainee. The company wanted him, but they weren't going to pay for him for free. And oh, did they spend money on Hyunjin? Let's break down what 3 years of training looks like for someone with Hyunjin's profile. A member who is being developed not just as a performer, but as a visual centerpiece, a brand ambassador, a face that would represent the group in every photo, every magazine cover, every advertisement, every public appearance. Visual training in K-pop is a whole category of development that most fans have no idea exists. It's not just about having a pretty face, it's about learning how to use that face. Facial expression coaching, learning how to convey emotions through subtle changes in your eyes, your jawline, your mouth, your brow. Camera awareness training, understanding your angles, knowing which side of your face photographs better, learning how to hit your mark during music video shoots so the lighting catches you perfectly. Posture and body language workshops, because a visual doesn't just stand around looking beautiful, they need to command attention through the way they hold themselves, the way they walk, the way they occupy space on a stage. Skincare regimens, styling consultations, hair and grooming sessions, all of these are part of the investment a company makes in their visual member, and all of these costs accumulate over time. 3 years of visual development at JYP's level? That's not a trivial expense. And that's just the visual component. Hyunjin's dance training is a whole other chapter of expenses because this is someone who would go on to become one of the most celebrated dancers in 4th-gen K-pop, and that kind of talent doesn't develop in a vacuum. It develops through thousands of hours of intensive, professionally guided training that costs a small fortune. Hyunjin trained in multiple dance styles at JYP Contemporary, Hip-hop, Urban Choreography, Freestyle, and the precise, synchronized group choreography that K-pop performances demand. Each style requires different instructors, different techniques, different approaches, and each instructor comes with their own rate. 3 years of multidiscipline dance training with top-tier choreographers and coaches? We're talking about one of the most expensive line items on any trainee's account, and for Hyunjin specifically, a member who is being groomed as a main dancer, the intensity and frequency of those sessions would have been even higher than average. More sessions per week, more one-on-one coaching, more specialized workshops, all translating to more cost, more debt, more weight on the account. And then there's the vocal development, which is where Hyunjin's debt profile gets another interesting layer. Unlike Changbin, who was primarily a rapper, or Seungmin, who came in as a natural vocalist, Hyunjin had to be built as a well-rounded performer who could hold his own vocally while also delivering visually and through dance. That well-rounded approach is actually more expensive than specialization in many cases because it requires training across multiple disciplines simultaneously rather than deep diving into one. Hyunjin needed vocal coaching to develop a singing voice that could stand alongside members like Seungmin and An. He needed rap training to deliver verses with conviction and style. He needed acting coaching for the dramatic elements of music videos and performances. Every single one of these development tracks ran concurrently over his 3-year training period, each one bleeding resources, each one adding lines to his trainee account. Now multiply all of that by 36 months. 36 months of housing in JYP dormitories, rent, utilities, maintenance, all logged. 36 months of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, supplements, all tracked. 36 months of transportation between training facilities, evaluation venues, practice locations, all documented. 36 months of wardrobe for evaluations and internal showcases, outfits, shoes, accessories, all provided by the company and all added to the bill. The sheer volume of basic living expenses over a 3-year period is staggering on its own, and when you layer on top of that the specialized training costs, the visual development expenses, the multidiscipline performance coaching, you start to see why number 3 on this list represents a massive jump from everything we've covered so far. And then there's the survival show, which for Hyunjin was particularly significant. Hyunjin was one of the most talked about members during the Stray Kids survival program. His visuals, his performances, his emotional moments all became major talking points that drove viewership and engagement. From the company's perspective, Hyunjin was a key asset in making the survival show successful, and key assets require key investments. Custom stage outfits for his performances, additional rehearsal time for his feature stages, styling sessions to ensure he looked his absolute best on camera at all times. All of these production-specific costs layered onto a trainee account that had already been accumulating for nearly 3 years by the time the cameras started rolling. There's also an element of Hyunjin's story that rarely gets discussed in the context of trainee debt, but is incredibly relevant: the opportunity cost. Hyunjin entered JYP at 15 and debuted at 18. Those 3 years from 2015 to 2018 represent his entire mid to late teenage years. While his peers were attending regular school, building social lives, exploring different career possibilities, having the normal teenage experiences that shape a person's identity, Hyunjin was locked inside a training facility, grinding 12 to 16 hours a day, accumulating debt with every passing moment. He didn't get a part-time job during high school. He didn't get work experience. He didn't get the chance to explore alternative career paths. Every single day of those 3 years was a bet on K-pop, and every single day that bet got more expensive. The longer he stayed, the more he owed, and the harder it became to walk away, because walking away would mean all that time, all that sacrifice, all that debt was for nothing. It's a psychological trap that keeps trainees grinding even when they're exhausted, even when they're homesick, even when they start questioning whether the dream is worth the price, because by year 2, by year 3, you've invested so much that quitting feels more costly than continuing. And that's exactly where Hyunjin found himself, too deep to quit, too invested to turn back, carrying a debt that conservative estimates place somewhere between 100 million to 140 million Korean won, approximately 77,000 to 107,000 US dollars. Let me say that again so it really lands. 100 million won. Potentially more. On the shoulders of an 18-year-old kid who got tapped on the shoulder while walking down a street 3 years earlier. Number 2, Han, the triple threat who is bleeding money from every direction. We're at number 2 now, and I need you to really lock in for this one, because the member sitting in this spot isn't just someone who trained a long time. This is someone who is doing everything. Rapping, singing, writing, producing, performing, creating entire bodies of work inside the walls of JYP Entertainment while the rest of the world had absolutely no idea he existed. We're talking about Han Ji-sung, the Swiss Army knife of Stray Kids, the member who defies categorization because he's not just a rapper, not just a vocalist, not just a producer, not just a lyricist, he's all of those things simultaneously. And every single one of those skills was developed, refined, and perfected inside a system that charged him for every second of it. Han joined JYP Entertainment around 2014 to 2015, which means by the time Stray Kids debuted in March 2018, this kid had been inside the trainee machine for approximately 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years. And unlike members who specialized in 1 or 2 areas, a dancer who needed vocal work, a singer who needed dance training, Ji-sung was being developed across virtually every performance category that exists in the K-pop idol framework. He was training as a rapper. He was training as a vocalist. He was training as a dancer. He was training as a songwriter. He was training as a producer. He was training as a performer. Every single one of those categories came with its own set of instructors, its own training schedule, its own resource requirements, and its own costs. If Changbin's trainee debt was inflated by his production work, and Hyunjin's was inflated by his visual development and multi-year training period, then Ji-sung's debt was inflated by literally everything, because he was training in literally everything. Let's start with the timeline, because Han's early entry into JYP puts him in a very different financial bracket than the members who joined in 2016 or 2017. By the time Lino and Seungmin were just walking through the front door, Han had already been accumulating costs for 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years of housing expenses already on his account. 2 to 3 years of meals, transportation, medical care, and daily living costs already stacked. 2 to 3 years of vocal training, dance practice, performance evaluations, and styling sessions already logged. He had a multi-year head start on the debt race, and that head start never went away. It just kept compounding month after month, year after year, like a financial snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and heavier with every rotation. Now let's talk about what makes Han's training profile uniquely expensive, his insane versatility. In the K-pop industry, most trainees are identified early as either a vocalist, a rapper, or a dancer, and their training is focused primarily on that specialty with supplementary work in other areas. It's more efficient that way. It's cheaper. You pour resources into one main discipline and maintain baseline competency in the others. But Ji-sung? Jisung refused to fit into a single box, and JYP recognized early on that this kid had the rare potential to excel across multiple disciplines. So they invested accordingly, which means they spent accordingly. Rap training for Han wasn't some side project. It was intensive, specialized coaching with professionals who understood flow, delivery, rhythm, breath control, freestyle technique, and the subtle art of making words hit harder than fists. Jisung's rap style, that rapid-fire, emotionally charged, technically complex delivery that makes your skin crawl in the best possible way, didn't just happen naturally. It was built through thousands of hours of practice, coaching, and refinement, each hour logged on his trainee account like a taximeter that never stops running. But here's what separates Han from someone like Changbin in the rap department. Jisung can also sing. And not just passably. He can genuinely, beautifully, powerfully sing. His vocal tone is one of the most distinctive in all of Stray Kids, and developing that tone to idol-level standards required a completely separate track of vocal training that ran parallel to his rap development. Double the instructors. Double the sessions. Double the costs. While Changbin was pouring extra resources into rap and production, and Hyunjin was pouring them into dance and visual development, Jisung was pouring resources into both rap and vocals at the highest level. 2 premium training tracks running simultaneously for 3 to 4 years. The financial weight of that dual-track development is enormous, and it's one of the key reasons Han sits above both Changbin and Hyunjin on this list. And then, just like Changbin, there's the production side. Han was the third member of 3 Racha, the trainee production unit that became the creative engine of Stray Kids. Alongside Bang Chan and Changbin, Jisung spent countless hours in JYP's recording studios, writing lyrics, composing melodies, crafting rap verses, recording demo after demo after demo. Everything we discussed about Changbin's studio time costs? Apply that to Han as well, but with even more time on the clock. 3 to 4 years of studio access versus Changbin's 2 to 3 years. That extra year or more of studio time, the equipment usage, the software licenses, the electricity, the engineering support, the production mentorship, it all adds up to a significantly larger number on Han's account compared to Changbin's. And here's a detail about Han's creative process that most fans find endearing, but has real financial implications. Jisung writes constantly, obsessively, compulsively. He's known for carrying notebooks everywhere, for recording voice memos of melody ideas at 3 in the morning, for staying in the studio long after everyone else has gone to bed, because a lyric isn't sitting right and he can't leave until it's perfect. That creative obsession, that refusal to stop until the work meets his standards, meant that Jisung used more studio resources than the average trainee producer. More recording time, more mixing sessions, more takes, more revisions, more of everything. And in the economy of trainee debt, more always means more expensive. Now let's talk about something that adds another layer to Han's debt story, his background before JYP. Jisung spent part of his childhood living in Malaysia with his family, which gives him an international element that's different from Felix's, but still financially relevant. His family's decision to eventually return to Korea and Jisung's subsequent entry into the trainee system involved transitions in schooling, in living arrangements, in career direction, that all carry costs, both direct and indirect. And once inside JYP, Jisung's adjustment period, his early development phase, his initial evaluations and placements. All of these early-stage processes from 2014 to 2015 represent some of the most expensive months of any trainee's journey because the company is essentially starting from scratch, assessing raw talent, identifying strengths and weaknesses, building a customized development plan, and investing heavily in foundational training that will support everything that comes after. Those early months are like the foundation of a building, invisible once the structure is complete, but absolutely essential and extremely expensive to lay. The survival show adds yet another financial chapter to Han's story, and it's worth noting that Jisung was one of the most prominent and impactful members throughout the entire run of the Stray Kids program. His rap performances were showstoppers. His emotional vulnerability during the show's more intense moments created some of the most memorable television the format has ever produced. And his creative contributions, the songs he wrote and produced specifically for the show's mission stages, showcased a level of artistry that went far beyond what anyone expected from a trainee. But every one of those standout moments required preparation, resources, and investment from the company. Custom arrangements for his rap stages. Studio time for recording mission tracks. Choreography sessions for group performances. Styling and wardrobe for each episode. Camera time, editing attention, storyline development. Jisung was a central character in the narrative of the show, and central characters cost more to produce than background players. Let's also address the mental health dimension, because it's impossible to talk about Han Jisung's trainee experience without acknowledging the psychological toll, and how that toll connects to financial reality. Jisung has been open about his struggles with anxiety, and while the exact timeline of when those struggles began is his personal story to tell, it's well documented that the pressure of the trainee system is one of the most common triggers for mental health issues among young idols. If Jisung sought any form of counseling, therapy, or mental health support during his trainee years, which would have been not only appropriate but necessary given the environment, those services would have come with costs that either went directly onto his trainee account or were absorbed in other ways that still impacted his overall financial picture. Number 1. Bang Chan, the 7-year prisoner of a dream that almost broke him. Here it is. The top of the mountain. The final name. The member who carried the heaviest, most suffocating, most absolutely mind-blowing trainee debt in all of Stray Kids, and, honestly, one of the most staggering trainee debts in the entire modern history of K-pop. And if you've been following this list from the beginning, if you've been watching the numbers climb higher and higher with each member, if you've been feeling the weight of each story pressing down on your chest a little harder with every point, then nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared you for the full scope of what this man endured. We're talking about Christopher Bang. Bang Chan. The leader. The founder. The architect. The man who didn't just survive the JYP trainee system, he lived inside it for 7 years. 7 years. Let me put that in perspective for you, because when you hear 7 years in casual conversation, it sounds like just a number. But when you translate that number into lived experience, into daily reality, into the grinding, relentless, soul-crushing machinery of a K-pop trainee system, 7 years becomes something that borders on incomprehensible. Bang Chan entered JYP Entertainment in 2010. He was 13 years old. A kid from Sydney, Australia, Korean-Australian, bilingual, bright-eyed, talented beyond his years, who flew across the world to chase a dream in a country that wasn't his home. And when he walked through those doors in 2010, do you know what the world looked like? Instagram had just launched. The iPhone 4 was brand new. K-pop was still years away from becoming the global phenomenon it is today. BTS hadn't debuted yet. Twice didn't exist. GOT7 was still just a concept in someone's notebook. The entire landscape of the industry that Bang Chan was entering would be unrecognizable compared to what it would become by the time he finally debuted in 2018. He entered as a child and emerged as an adult, and every single day in between was a day that added to a trainee debt so enormous it almost defies belief. Let's start with the raw mathematics, because the numbers alone tell a devastating story. 7 years of housing in JYP dormitories. 84 months of rent, utilities, maintenance, and living expenses, all logged meticulously on his trainee account. 7 years of meals, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and everything in between, 3 meals a day, 365 days a year, for 7 years. That's over 7,600 meals, every single one tracked and billed. 7 years of transportation costs. 7 years of medical checkups, dental visits, health screenings. 7 years of wardrobe for evaluations, showcases, and internal performances. 7 years of the invisible, constant, never-ending drip of basic living expenses that most people never think about, but that compound into astronomical sums over time. And that's just the baseline. That's just the cost of existing inside the system. The training costs, the actual skills development that justifies the entire enterprise, are a whole other universe of expenses. Vocal training, spanning 7 years of evolution from a raw 13-year-old voice to the powerful, versatile, emotionally devastating instrument that Bang Chan possesses today. Dance training, covering every style, every technique, every choreographic discipline that JYP's world-class instructors could throw at him over the better part of a decade. Performance coaching, stage presence workshops, camera training, interview preparation, variety show skills, the endless, exhausting curriculum of idol development that leaves no skill untouched and no cost unaccounted for. 7 years of all of it. Every instructor's fee, every studio hour, every evaluation, stacked and compounded over a timeline so long that most trainees would have been chewed up and spit out 3 times over. But Bang Chan's training costs go far beyond the standard curriculum because just like Changbin and Han, Chan was a producer. Not just a producer, the mastermind. The creative engine that would eventually power Stray Kids' entire discography. Bang Chan taught himself to produce music inside JYP studios, spending night after night, year after year, hunched over a computer screen, learning software, experimenting with sounds, building beats, writing melodies, crafting the sonic identity that would one day make Stray Kids one of the most musically respected groups in all of K-pop. And he did this for 7 years. 7 years of studio time. 7 years of equipment usage. 7 years of software licenses, production tools, mixing resources, recording sessions, and creative experimentation. If Changbin's 2 to 3 years of studio work added tens of millions of won to his debt, and Han's 3 to 4 years added even more, imagine what 7 years of the same did to Bang Chan's account. The studio alone probably represents one of the single largest line items on his entire trainee debt, a number so large it would make a professional accountant wince. And here's the part of Chan's story that guts me every single time. He watched everyone else debut while he stayed behind. For 7 years, Bang Chan stood inside the walls of JYP Entertainment and watched wave after wave of trainees enter the system after him, train for less time than him, and debut before him. He watched GOT7 form and debut in 2014, 4 years after he entered. He was there. He saw it happen. He trained alongside some of those members, shared practice rooms with them, ate meals with them, and then watched them walk out the door into the spotlight while he stayed behind, still waiting, still training, still accumulating debt. Then twice debuted in 2015 through a survival show that captivated the nation and launched 9 members into superstardom 5 years after Chan entered the system. 5 years of watching others succeed while he remained a trainee. A number on a roster, a face in a practice room that nobody outside those walls knew existed. And then day 6. And then other soloists. And then more groups. Year after year, debut after debut, Chan watched the system work for everyone except him. And with every debut that wasn't his, the question got louder, the doubt got sharper, and the debt got heavier. Because every month that passed without debuting was another month of costs without returns. Another month of investment without payoff. Another month where the company had to justify keeping him on the books, and Chan had to justify staying in a system that seemed to have forgotten about him. Can you imagine the psychological torture of that? 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, every birthday spent inside that building, watching your youth slip away, watching your debt climb higher, watching other people live the dream you've been sacrificing everything for. There were moments, Chan has talked about this publicly, where he seriously considered quitting. Walking away. Going back to Australia. Going back to his family. Going back to a normal life. And who could blame him? After 5 years with no debut, after 6 years with no debut, at what point does perseverance become delusion? At what point does holding onto a dream become holding onto a chain? The debt by that point would have been staggering enough to make quitting feel not just reasonable but logical. He owed JYP a fortune. He had no income. He had no debut. He had nothing but a growing pile of songs nobody had heard, a growing pile of skills nobody had seen, and a growing pile of debt nobody was going to forgive. And yet he stayed. He stayed because something inside Christopher Bang refused to accept that 7 years of his life had been for nothing. He stayed because he believed, against all evidence, against all logic, against the screaming voice of doubt in his head, that his moment was coming. And then he did something that changed everything. Instead of waiting for JYP to build a group around him, Chan built one himself. He handpicked the members. He identified the trainees he believed in, Changbin and Jisung first, forming 3 Racha, and then expanding outward to assemble the 8-member unit that would become Stray Kids. He went to the company with a vision, a team, and a body of music that proved he wasn't just a trainee anymore. He was a leader, a creator, a visionary who had spent 7 years in the wilderness and emerged with a blueprint for something extraordinary. And JYP listened. And that right there is the part of the K-pop dream that the music videos don't show you. The part that the stage lights don't illuminate. The part that the fan cams and the photo cards and the sold-out arenas can never fully explain. That every single second of glory you see today was purchased with years of invisible sacrifice, sleepless nights, empty wallets, and a faith so stubborn it borders on madness. Stray Kids didn't just debut. They bought their way out of a prison made of debt, doubt, and time, and they did it together, carrying each other's weight when their own became too heavy to bear alone. And that's why they're not just idols. They're survivors. Always have been. Always will be. That's a wrap on this list. Thanks for staying all the way through, and if this hit you as hard as it hit me writing it, you already know what to do.